Well, every single week here on the Fight Guys, Erik Apple is bringing you some of the most relevant, interesting guests, people with something to share. And man, this guy's got a lot to share. He loves telling you all about it. His name is Dan Diaz. He created Hitman Fight Gear, one of my closest friends. Dan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Yes, definitely close friends. And yeah, I definitely can talk.
It's funny because, I feel like I go out of my way to sometimes not bring on closer friends on the show. But the thing is someone like you is very relevant in combat sports. You created a brand called Hitman Fight Gear, maybe even prior to 2000 or right around the turn of the century. And it was you were one of the pioneers of the combat sports or MMA clothing business, right?
Yeah. We actually, my brother and me started it in 2002. Prior to that, we had been working with Rage Athletic Wear, which was a brand that was based out of King of the Cage. And we had the licenses for King of the Cage, Gladiator Challenge, Pride FC in the United States. And we handled all fulfillment for Pride and brought over all the designs and posters and everything else. And then in around 2002, those deals ended. And so we started Hitman Fight Gear and got that rolling.
So did you choose to opt out of those deals, or they just kind of ran their course and were never renewed?
Yeah, they weren't renewed. Yeah. So the Pride FC deal, Hideki and Yukino, and anybody that's listened to Rampage recently has heard him speak about them. They were interesting to work with. They were Japanese, so there was definitely some cultural differences there. But that deal expired and they wanted to move on and handle it in-house, which was fine. And then King of the Cage and Gladiator Challenge, you just come to that fork in the road with Terry and kind of moved on to other things. And it was good. It all worked out,
So tell me, back then, you were already working with Pride and King of the Cage. Two of the three biggest promotions in the world.
Yeah. No, we, definitely hit the ground running, but it was not, the sport at that time was not what it is, was not what it was going to be even 3 years later. In 2002, when the Fertittas came on board, 2004, the Ultimate Fighter came out, there was a rapid, ascent into the public space at that point in time. The UFC had been big to a niche market, and guys like you and guys like me that were interested in combat sports and training definitely gravitated a lot more, but it was much more of a small private club. But yeah, at that time, and yes, those were the biggest shows in the world. It was really exciting to work with them and get to bring, I got to design shirts for Pride Fighting Championships that were distributed here in the United States for several events, Demolition being one of the key ones. Suzuki Sakuraba designs originally from Pride, Wanderlei Silva, Heath Herring, Igor Vovchanchyn, and really open those up to the American market, which was exciting, with Apparel.
Yeah, talk about the explosion of MMA, after 2004 with the Ultimate Fighter. Talk about like the numbers you were doing. I'm sure on actual Hitman Fight Gear stuff, not licensed stuff, I'm sure you went from a couple dozen to thousands or tens of thousands, right? After that explosion?
So King of the Cage as an event and showing up to events and selling, you have to remember that we used to pack up and go to events like King of the Cage, WEC, UAGF, Combat, what is it? You were
Ultimate
the title.
Athlete.
Ultimate Athlete, UA events, stuff like that. At those events, we would do $3,000 to $5,000 in sales. And, there's a high margin when you're just producing goods and selling them direct to consumer.
Sure.
So they were actually really profitable. And then our website was clocking maybe about $2,000 to $3,000 a month consistently. So it was a good business. And then we made money operating the Pride license and King of the Cage also. So it was viable financially. We were actually doing pretty well. But then we lost those licenses. There was a big jump to go to Hitman and kind of like exit out of the King of the Cage show because we no longer sold there. And they were putting on shows on a regular basis. So that was, $7,000 to $10,000 a month that we could count on bringing in. So with Hitman kind of being just in other smaller shows at the time, and also online trying to build a new brand, my background was in action sports, which is where I met you originally. And, coming from that industry into MMA, I saw that there was a white space in the action sports market for MMA apparel. And really who I followed, again, where I met you and interestingly, was Metal Militia, because I had seen the explosion of freestyle motocross going from guys that were friends of ours that were sleeping in vans and crashing on people's couches to all of a sudden that sport exploding and millions of fans worldwide and the brands doing millions of dollars. And I realized that those were the exact same fans that I was seeing at MMA events. And so I knew that there could be this lead in to action sports retail distribution by following those models. And so, I just identified somewhat of forecasted a pattern that was going to show itself.
I guess I was more responsible for Hitman's success than I knew.
Yeah. And, I've always given you credit. You are the original bridge between action sports and MMA. And, it's under-recognized and probably under-rewarded. But yeah, the stuff that you were doing, with Metal Militia, and then, me and you became friends, and you partnering Hitman with Metal Militia added some validity to Hitman, and Metal Militia was being distributed through No Fear stores. And, again, through a friend of ours, Carrie Hart, I was able to get Fight Gear onto the Inked TV show. And at that time, there was not all these reality TV shows. There was not tattoo-based reality TV shows, not that were marketed towards younger Americans. So that show, featured a UFC King of the Cage fighter that they did a whole episode on him, and I had him in Hitman Fight Gear. It was Erik Apple, who was also a tattoo artist at Hart and Huntington.
Got it.
And so he was working out of the Palms, and Carrie. Oh, big credit to Carrie.
That's right.
Yeah. And big credit to Carrie Hart. He said, yeah, and he signed off on Hitman being on the show and allowed that to happen and opened that door for me, which was huge opportunity. And, it was featured on the show, and that opened the door to No Fear stores. And
Carrie's always been
that was about, and that was 2004. And so I had the first nationally distributed through retail MMA brand,
so
not fight shops.
Can we kind of migrate a little bit over to talk about fight sponsorships? Now, obviously, since you're one of the original fight brands and you were at the King of the Cages back in the very beginning of our sport, I'm sure you were paying guys $100, a couple $100 to wear your fight shorts and stuff like that.
I was. Rampage, wore Rage Athletic wear in his first fight in King of the Cage, and that cost $400.
$400.
$400.
And I bet he was happy.
And he was, because there was no sponsors. You had Tapout, and those guys were operating on shoestring budgets at the time. There was not a lot of money to go around in the industry once you pay bills, warehouse costs, production, and a little bit of money to live on. It was definitely tough at times, but Rampage $400. It ranged from a few $100s to some of the guys getting $1,000 or more.
So you were paying some people $1,000 in King of the Cage back then?
Yeah. Once because they kind of got back on pay-per-view and definitely, like I said, the events were big. And if you sponsored the main event fighter, you sold more gear, Yeah.
It's funny how much people underestimate the role that King of the Cage played in the development of our sport. In the early 2000s, a lot of main guys came out of King of the Cage. It was not a joke.
No, not at all. And
you can think whatever you want about Terry, but he played a role.
Terry is a businessman, and Terry taught me that there's a difference between business friends and business people that you're doing. And he's a businessman, and he adhered to every contract and every agreement that I made with him. But yeah, he would change deals when time was up, and he would do what was best for him and King of the Cage.
Yeah, which is fine. Listen, so then talk about once our sport was, kind of in what I like to call the golden age, the late 2000s. You went from paying Rampage $400 in the main event to paying guys like Wanderlei Silva $50,000-$60,000 for a fight to wear your stuff.
Yep. Yeah, $50,000 per fight for Wanderlei. And that was to be the main sponsor. There were some things going on with sponsorship then that I didn't agree with and still don't. That's an industry problem. But yes, $50,000 for a fighter. I heard guys were getting more than that. Chuck, was in the $200,000 range.
Yeah. So your brand, because of its success, you got acquired by Tapout first and then ABG. How did that work? Kind of explain that.
So, I built Hitman up. Like I said, we had opened up retail, and I'd actually taken Dan from Tapout to meet the buyer for No Fear, because unknown to a lot of people behind the scenes, and a lot of people actually are aware of it, but I did a lot of private label manufacturing and contract design work for other brands. And one of my brands that I worked with very closely was Tapout. Very early on, me and Dan Caldwell, hit it off and became friends. And I manufactured and designed the fight shorts for Tapout, basketball jerseys, rash guards, a lot of cut and sew product, and then also helped design, I think 7 out of the best-selling 10 Tapout shirts of all time. Had a hand in some of that. So I brought Tapout into No Fear because if they do well and sell more stuff, I'm going to make more stuff for them. And also as a category, we wanted to build this. Single brand can be an anomaly, but once you start adding multiple brands, you become a category, MMA brand category in retail. And so that's, I'm going to open up some doors and they're going to get in, open up some doors and I'm going to get in. And they were definitely had a much closer relationship. Charles was close with the Fertittas. He was close with Dana White. They definitely were the marquee sponsor of the UFC at that time. And so, I felt like it was good to be close to them.
They were the only consistent sponsor, right? They were the only people to put money into every event, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And, that was a lot of credit to Charles. He was the one that maintained relationships.
Do you know what that cost to be the title sponsor back then? I'm sure it was like 10 grand an event, 15 grand an event. Probably not very much.
You would have to talk to Dan Caldwell about that. Like numbers, they kept him pretty close to that. Yeah, let's try and get him on. He would be a great guest because he has some of that knowledge.
So you got acquired first by Tapout, and then ABG acquired Tapout and everybody?
So yes, in 2008, because I had built myself up to be a solid competitor to Tapout, they brought in a new president to run the company named Mark Kreiner, and they definitely identified me as a competitor. And, due to my private label manufacturing, they wanted to bring me in to design for them in-house, work on, the fight brand in-house, help Tapout, and then man was doing well. So yeah, they acquired it in 2008. At that point in time, it was the only time in our industry really that a larger company had acquired a smaller company, which is something that we had consistently seen in action.
So, and what other brands did Tapout acquire besides yourself?
So they did Hitman, and then they started a sub-brand based on the movie Warrior, because that was going into production, called Soul of a Lion, SOL. So there was Soul of a Lion. And then they started to talk to Dethroned, and there was a deal made with Dethroned, but that was right at the end, and the water got a little muddy, and I think that deal fell apart. They also had Triumph United in and talked to them, but ultimately it just ended up being Tapout and Hitman.
Is that when ABG stepped in?
So yes, Charles died, and that was a big catastrophe for Tapout, and he was definitely the voice and the vision, and maintained a lot of the close relationships with the UFC. And so when he passed away, there was a lot of stuff going on. It was 2010. There was a major recession going on in the United States. A lot of people were not buying clothing or anything like that. Everything was getting sold. Houses were getting cut in half values. And so it was tough running a brand then. And ABG came along, and Jamie's son was a fan of MMA. And Jamie kind of identified Tapout as being like the main, company in MMA. And so he went about acquiring Tapout.
So Let me ask you, now looking back, 15, 20 years later, what are some of the biggest regrets about the way you handled the brand? I mean, do you regret anything? Is there things you could have done different and better?
So I did get sober in 2008, and I would say that had I been sober, gotten in 2000 or 2002, the brand would have been a lot more successful. I definitely had a lot of fun, and me and you had a lot of fun, and I had somewhat of a problem. I can remember when I said I was going to stop drinking, and you said that sounds like a good idea. So your friends encourage you, like, yeah, that's a good idea for you. So that's really my only regret. Again, everything works out the way it's supposed to, and it all kind of planned out perfectly. You can't plan around certain things. My acquisition with Tapout was three ring binders. When it came to the end, we did end up in a lawsuit, and that's it.
And they paid you.
I have a friend named Brian. Huh?
And they paid you.
We prevailed. Yes, we did prevail in those lawsuits, and worked everything out. I came out of those lawsuits with a lot more respect for Jamie Salter from ABG, the way himself and the way that the conversations that he had with me made a lot of sense, and on their approach to business. What else was I going to say? I forget. Go ahead.
Just big boy stuff with Jamie Salter and those guys. You learn that brands have a life expectancy, and you get what you can out of it. And lawsuits are kind of a natural part of big boy business.
That's it.
Let's shift gears a little bit. I mean, I know you're still an MMA fan. Let's talk about the big UFC on Paramount card this weekend. Let's just focus on the two main events: Song Yadong versus Sean O'Malley. Sean O'Malley is a -200 favorite. He's lost a couple fights in a row. Hasn't done so great. What do you think about that co-main?
I mean, I'm a big fan of Sean. The fundamental changes he made after his first loss, to I'm spacing on his name.
The Georgian.
But yeah, the Georgian. After he lost that fight, he stopped smoking weed, stopped going on social media, just really got engrossed into his fight camp. Rematch too, but I think he made those fundamental changes, and I became much more of a fan because I love that when fighters identify that, hey, weed is for winners, having fun is for winners. Like, if you're not winning, you shouldn't be doing that shit. You should be working towards winning. And so he made those fundamental changes. So yeah, I think Sean O'Malley is going to win. Yadong, I mean, he should be called the Donger because that's a great nickname. But I feel like he's young. He's going to have some more opportunities, but I think it's Sean's moment. And I think the rematch with Sean and Peter Yan is fate, for those two to match again.
Yeah, I like that Sean O'Malley, instead of blaming his camp and his coaches, he looked at himself and made changes within himself and didn't go to a different camp. Main event, Paddy Pimblett, Justin Gaethje. Man, Paddy Pimblett is -222 on BetOnline. Pretty crazy. I mean, Gaethje's getting older. You always got to go with the youth and the size because Paddy is massive. But I don't know. Gaethje's a great wrestler. He can control where the fight is, and it's hard to outslug Justin Gaethje.
Yeah, and I mean, he has Trevor Whitman in his corner, running his fight camps. They're so intellectual on their camp and their approach to fights. And, I never sleep on Justin Gaethje. Paddy Pimblett is on a tear right now. And, we both know the best looking guy in MMA, Chael Sonnen, and he went with Paddy Pimblett, and I can't really disagree with Chael. I have to agree with that. I think Pimblett's going to come out with the win on this one.
Yeah, the original gangster of MMA. And I know everybody's sad because the championship fight between Kayla Harrison and Amanda Nunes for the lesbian fighting championship belt is not going to happen. So, oh no.
I know, yeah. I'm going to miss that bathroom break. No, that would have been a great fight. There is certain women that you do want to watch fight because that something exciting is going to happen. I think that fight for sure was going to be one of those fights. I feel really bad for Kayla Harrison. You know, we both know it's not fun being injured. We've both, you know, broken ourselves pretty badly, and to go into, you know, surgery that quickly means that something was really wrong. So I'm hoping that she comes out healthy on the other side.
Yeah, she's a tough chick. So, man, UFC pulling out all the cards for all the fighters for the big card on UFC Paramount. It's going to be pretty exciting. Not the biggest names, but man, guys who really bring it. And with that, we're going to wrap up this episode. Another one where our viewers got to learn some stuff about the business of combat sports and MMA. So Dan Diaz, thanks for being with us here on The Fight Guys, and we're going to see everybody next week.